We are now recording.
Good evening, Garrison. Call to order the Board of Education meeting, Garrison Union Free School District, this Wednesday, June 10th, 2020. First order of business, the roll call. Dusty?
Jocelyn Apsello.
Here.
David Gelber.
Here.
James Hawk.
Here.
Courtney McCarthy.
Here.
Matthew Spicer.
Here.
And Sarah Tarmy.
Here.
Excellent. Okay, next up, Pledge of Allegiance. I'll lead the pledge. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Dusty? President's announcements. I just have a few here, mostly fairly meaningful ones. One is I just wanted to congratulate everybody who is, once again, who's graduating from high school. We have a list of those students who were affiliated with the class of 2020 in Garrison School. They're now dispersed around the world. And one of them, I believe, is also completing an international baccalaureate. But, and so it's still staying on to finish that. But I just wanted to say congratulations on behalf of everyone at Guffs and this board. I also signed diplomas, I think it was yesterday maybe, or Monday, which is one of the true benefits is putting your signature on the diplomas as board president. And I just wanted to say congratulations to all our 8th graders. Good luck wherever you're going. I'm sure that all of the graduation events are completely in flux and perhaps we'll get an update, but at the same time, you know, our heart is with you and we hope you go off and do good things for yourself and for the world. The other point is that as has been indicated in many publications, the budget vote and the election of candidates for the board is ongoing, and that will continue by mail from now until July 16th at 5 p.m.
June 16th.
Sorry, June 16th at 5 p.m. Sorry. I want to also just remind the board members to mute your mic so that we don't have too much cacophony. That is it for now. Only to say that, you know, events, sometimes events happen in the world that force us to look inward and examine certain aspects of what we do. So there's an agenda item here, a discussion item on issues of equity. And I hope it leads to a lot of positive discussion amongst board members. And we hope that we can move forward with a decision on how to proceed. Okay, Deborah, you're up.
Okay. Thank you very much, James. And you're correct. We have a lot on our plate. We have a vote coming up. We have many issues. And I'm going to open with just a few statements about what you just talked about. I know the community will, and the board will have a discussion about this later, but I simply want to say that, you know, recently, prior to all of this, the board members at our policy committee, and I'm sure they'll talk about this, continue to review policy changes. And when we do that, we talk a lot about shifting practices and all the important things that we need to do as a school district, as every school district does, as you look inward, as James, you just said. And so about 3 weeks ago, we spoke about, maybe longer, conducting an equity audit as a step to building cultural responsiveness. And it's something that all schools really need to think about as it touches on curriculum instruction, structural practices, and really inherent bias. So that kind of led off prior to the current conversation. And then most recently, the board certainly sent a letter, and prior to that, I just want to share with the board that I also sent a letter with some links to our staff about the recent news on racial injustice. and the role that everyone has in making a difference. Sending a few posts. I'm not going to read what I wrote, but say that there's always more we can do, and there's still so much more to be done in each and every day. And so I finalized it by saying, I ask that each of you give this your full attention as you consider our responsibilities to make a difference. And added 2 links to that. And basically summarizing, we need to ask ourselves to examine what we do in the classroom and why we haven't done more to address implicit bias. So there were 2 links that were sent, how teachers can hold themselves accountable for dismantling racial oppression and speak up at school, how to respond to everyday prejudice, bias, and stereotypes. And I'm glad to put that out on the website if some would like that. I just simply want to share, and I know that my time is ending with all of you, but I've worked with some close colleagues who facilitate professional learning sessions about engaging conversations in race. And they would tell me it's very hard and messy work, but it's essential. I've seen some cautious principals begin to lead their staffs in these, what I would call courageous conversations, and teams of teachers start to address those interpersonal issues of race in strong and honest ways. And it translates to a true change in culture as they look at their data and they really look at all the lenses. We're a small school, and the conversations are even more important in a small school. So we need to engage in focused discussions about anti-racism and educate each other on how to take those well-formed and actionable steps. This board started that conversation actually prior to all of this in policy. I know you're going to continue to talk about it. But I also, as part of my role as a superintendent, I also feel a responsibility to share the emails that I get with you. And basically, to the letters I wrote to staff, I heard back from 2. And there's some emails that came based on your letter. I won't say names, but one person wrote, a parent, and just the first sentence, and James responded to this, so you did see this one. Thank you for the much needed letter, since silence speaks volumes. Another parent wrote to me and said, what murders are you referring to other than the death of George Floyd, respectfully? A parent wrote and Alex responded. And she then wrote with me, I appreciate your thoughtful response. I read the board letter and appreciate the efforts being made because our school is not particularly diverse. I think we're already pretty good at acceptance, inclusion, and providing equal opportunities. What we could use more of might be awareness, additional Black history, education, proactive anti-racist training, and maybe the current events in schools and social studies. And she says a little bit more. And then one that just came that I did respond to, and you were included in that one as well today, actually just before the meeting, I think that's when I read it. Thank you for issuing a statement about George Floyd. It has caused much pain, grief, and sadness on our tiny town. As a parent, I'm asking, what can I do? I know and it goes on to say, like most of us, I thought we were doing enough, but are we? So there's lots of conversations out there. I know we'll talk about them, but I wanted to open with that before I got into all the business kinds of things that I need to share. So thank you for letting me do that.
Deborah,
David?
can I follow up on what you were saying? So what you're saying is that it's been your experience that as part of professional development, it's been useful to have sessions with faculty in which someone who is professionally able to help teachers understand where they're coming from on this issue. So you'd recommend that something like that happen here?
Yeah, someone to lead them, or themselves if they have someone within their group to do that, or the principal to lead them. But those conversations are key. I think we don't understand the kinds of things we do. For example, I don't know if James will agree with me talking this much at this point, but I will say this. For example, in a district where I was superintendent, we did a lot of work with Minority Student Achievement Network. And one young man, one young Black student came to me, and he was at that point, I think, a junior or a senior, and he wanted me to understand something. And that was when he was in elementary school, he received very appropriate education, a lot of rigor, loved being in school. And when he went to the larger high school, what he found is even though he was in AP classes, most of the time the questions he got, and I don't know that the staff realized they were doing this, were always the easy questions. So he'd raise his hand, want to speak, and he would say to me, Dr. Jackson, you know, it's like I'm not called upon. It's like the assumption is that I can't answer. And that would be an example, David, of what I would say, that we need to make sure we understand how we think. And it's we're many times blind to that. So I guess that would be my example. And that requires us to really look at how we address. I worked on the state test for new school building leaders. And we would look at the videos that we had to teach, we would use for the exam. Almost all of them of teachers teaching for observation training, we needed to throw out because there was inherent bias in them. And these were supposed to be some of the best teachers. So again, this is not about people not being good. This is about a lack of understanding.
Let's try to
talk to that at later.
Yeah, I don't want to lose the thread
Okay.
of this very important conversation.
Okay.
And I'm afraid if we are going in and out of business
Yeah.
and then dealing with this major issue, it's going to beg for follow-up questions, clarifications. So let's try to make sure that we honor that impulse.
I will honor that, and I will try to say little when that time comes, because that's a board conversation. So let's talk.
I think you're going to be saying a lot during that conversation. I hope. I just want to encourage members to take notes on anything Deborah is saying and have follow-up questions after that. Okay.
So
right.
We received a letter dated April 27th, even though we just got it, and it was from the DOT about the intersection of Route 9 and Snake Hill Road. In response, they're basically telling us they're putting a larger sign, and the work is anticipated to be completed by the end of April 2020. So as a board, you may want to respond again to that, but it looks like that's their final response to our request that they address that intersection. So I've shared that letter with you, and you have it, and at some point, again, it can come back on the agenda for certain. Just so you all know that Governor Cuomo did finally suspend the section of the law that would have put districts' state aid in jeopardy for not completing the APPR process for teachers and principals. It wasn't possible to do that. I think New York City did continue, but upstate, all our suburban districts could not. And so at this point, it's hold harmless until next year. We do not have any teachers up for tenure at this point in time or any staff, but still, I know that that's an important component that all schools do to really make sure they give good feedback to their staff, their educators. There is a regional reentry meeting with the state. It's scheduled for June 22nd. It looks like Jim Ryan, our BOCES superintendent, can have someone or a few people on that, attend that as part of a Zoom. So I believe I've asked Carl to put his name forth, and I have put his name forth because I think he is the person from the district who really should be on that to start to do that work with the state. So if there's more slots, I'm sure we'll find out. But right now they're limiting, they're suggesting one person at most from each of the districts. As you know, graduation, James spoke to it. O'Neill's will be virtual and held on June 24th at 7 p.m. Haldane is reviewing their date given the shift from the governor, but I know they're having that conversation about possibly 2 sections later, and they would be looking at June 26th if that should happen. We looked at ours, and we did not get approval for our models thus far. And talking to the students and their parents, Alex has been very proactive, and they would like to stay with the date we have. So we'll be staying with that date. It'll be limited. It'll be more of a car drive-in because that's the only one that we believe we can get approval for at this time. So he has a plan put together, and we'll be finalizing that with the parents. The design team isn't presenting tonight. We've been looking forward to that next meeting. I think they had some work to do. So they'll be doing field work at the school on June 17th. So I certainly hope shortly after that we'll have another meeting so we can finalize everything that, that we need to do. Jonathan Costa is conducting a session on reentry planning as well at the BOCES on Friday, June 12th. Again, I've passed that on to Carl, Mr. Albano. I think that he may welcome some time with Jonathan Costa. I do not know if board members can attend. I can look into that. If someone's interested, please send me a note. It's at 12 o'clock. It's a Zoom. This just came out, actually I think today, but it looks like districts will be allowed a revote. But any resubmission to the original or revised budget will be conducted at a date and process determined by a future executive order. However, such a revote will not occur prior to July 9th. So we've been wondering what the governor would do with that, but that's where he's at. So it would be after July 9th. Again, no details, and it would be a future executive order. But, you know, I like to make sure that as the board, you know where things stand. So with our budget vote, we will need a board meeting after the votes are counted. So you'll need a vote next week. It should be within 24 hours. Given the number of voters we've had come through, I would suggest you plan on Thursday. But we can discuss that later as we get into the meeting. But that would allow that to happen and give Dusty enough time to make sure that all those votes can be counted. She cannot begin to count until 5 o'clock, the date, every next Tuesday. And we've set up a live stream to open. We're required to do that. So because we set it up as a Zoom, we can have 100 voters at any time, 100 people, not voters, 100 people watching. There's a link there that if there's an additional number of people who want to watch, they'll be directed to a YouTube site. We didn't start with the YouTube site because we found the Zoom link was much more stable. So that's there and people will be able to watch if they want to watch the opening of the ballots. I want to go back to something that we've been discussing internally, and I've given a heads up, but I have more information today. As you know, we will need to find a transportation company for September. I spoke to Transportation Advisory Service, Brian LaFountain, about an RFP. I had talked to our attorneys. They have not done a bid for transportation. I've talked to some other places. They have not done one either. I had used someone to do one a while back. It's a complex process because part of what you want to make sure is it's not simply just putting something out. Someone comes in, they look at all our routes, they try to see what we can do best, they look at timing, they look at all the pieces you might need. They look to see, you know, should we put an option in for cameras? They make sure that only responsible bidders get that work. Brian LaFountain actually wrote the first to help the state and worked for state ed developing RFPs and bids for transportation. He did send me a proposal. I got it yesterday and spoke this morning to Michael Torty, who I can bring up. I suggest that we consider that very strongly because you'll need one in place for school to start, so the timing is tight. If I write one and hand it off to Carl, I'm not so sure you're going to get the best work. And I don't mean that we're not good at what we do, but this is specialized. I also think that I'm like stumbling here, but I see this as something that would be very helpful in putting it in place because this ends up being a document that you can have for 10 years and you just roll up with CPI. So it's not a one-year piece. His cost to do this from soup to nuts, to meet with everyone, to meet with our attorneys, to put it together, to meet with all the possible bidders, to have a conversation, to get it set up and make sure it's running. They do exactly what they agree and work with you after the process is done and you adopt. Starting in June, we're tight, making sure you have a transportation contract in place in August would be $13,750. So Dusty has an agenda, and I know it's last minute. She has a item that she can put on the agenda giving me permission to enter into a contract. You might want to do that, and then if you choose not to in conversation, I can stop that. But I think that it's probably money well spent. Your transportation costs in total run about $600,000 a year. It's a lot of money. So this is a small piece. The money would come from the money we saved this year. We have not paid out the rest to our transportation contractor. As you know, he laid off his employees. We had savings there. We have fuel savings. We had paid the fuel. I think that's something that Brian LaFountain would look at. Who's going to pay the fuel? It doesn't make sense for us to be giving those kind of credit cards out and doing that. So all of that would be part of it. So your savings that you've had more than that. You've had more than double of that in savings this year. That's where that money would come from. So I don't need an answer now, but Dusty can put that on the agenda, or I just think the sooner we move, the better with that one. And I'm sorry that's a last minute surprise to all of you. Also, just so you all know, last day for students is Friday, this Friday. And I appreciate the effort of all the teachers coming and all the parents coming by to wave. That's been a lot of fun. I've been out there a few days. It was very warm out there today. And I guess we'll be doing that Thursday and Friday. And for 10-month employees and our teachers, their last day is Monday. They're coming in on 15-minute, like half-hour intervals, and they're spread in the building. They'll be getting their personal items and anything they think they might need to teach remotely next year. So they may be sending out document cameras, a few other things, because we want to make sure that's prepared and moving forward. So I don't think I forgot anything on my agenda. I'm sorry that was a little long, but there's...
No, it's always informative, Dr. Jackson. So
May I ask a question of just how do you spell the person's name who you were suggesting might?
Actually, it's right here. Dusty could probably put that up on a temporary agenda. You could read it in the doc.
Okay.
The name it's called TAS, Transportation Advisory Services. His name is Brian L.A. Fountain, like a water fountain. And so I actually was surprised he's still around. He's been doing this for a lot of districts. I think he'll be doing Carmel's next year. But I know we don't have a lot of buses, but it's still an expense, and you want to make sure that that you can make adjustments going forward.
Right. I think it's a case of spending a little bit of money or on getting a solid contract so that we save money in the long run. And since we have saved money this year due to the remote learning, I think within the transportation budget line, it seems to me to make a sound decision and an opportunity that we shouldn't pass up, given that these contracts tend to go on for many, 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 many years, right?
If you want, also, Michael spoke to him today. So if you'd like, I can promote Michael as well. He said to me, if you have questions of him, he'd be glad to come into this as well. Conversation. Just let me know.
Deborah, before we conclude, are arrangements being made for parents to have individual conferences with teachers about their kids as the year ends?
That's a great question, David. I would hope, but that the teachers have been having regular conversations with the parents, but that's because that's something we really asked of in this Zoom setting. And maybe that's been more prevalent in the younger grades, because as I'm on with, I happen to be on with a first grader a few times, even today. It's hard, and I was on, I think Krista was on with a third grader I was on with the other day. It's really hard for those young ones not to be on without their parents on. It's just part and parcel of that. So those conversations have been happening. I certainly can, and again, it's not good to make assumptions, but that would have been my assumption. Report cards are coming out, and I know that everyone has been meeting. So if parents haven't, I would encourage them to email or call the teachers. I will certainly put a reminder out to all of our teachers tomorrow morning that if you haven't heard from a parent, reach out.
Thank you.
Yes, Court.
Just a quick question going all the way back to the DOT letter and the larger sign. I haven't personally really left my little bubble here, but has anybody driven down Route 9 and has the sign changed?
Route 9 exists, but I don't know about the sign. So I want to point out a clarification here, though. There is a discrepancy between what we asked for in our original letter and what Sandy Galiff, our assembly person, and other folks asked of the Department of Transportation. Our request was for them to look at the road, to look at creating a safer space so that our buses could travel in a more safe fashion. It wasn't to talk about a light. That was someone else's issue. And it wasn't really necessarily about the intersection. The death of one of our parents that occurred there certainly occurred at the intersection, and that intersection is problematic. But it's mostly problematic, I would imagine, because of the factors that go into it. The reason that they don't want to put a light there is that they're afraid of rear-end collisions. That makes sense. Why? Because there's a blind rise on the when you're heading north, right? There's a little blind rise and you come down a hill, and there's some difficulties there. And the reason, maybe they're going too fast. Maybe the road needs to be, I don't know. I'm not a road engineer. I'm not a traffic engineer, but that was not our request. Our request was to study the road itself, the traffic itself, to ensure that we can navigate, that our buses can navigate effectively and our citizens can be safe. That is not the response they gave. They gave us a response on a very particular issue, but that is not the request we made. So am I right about that?
Do we reissue a request? And
I think a clarifying letter would be important, because I don't think they did. I think they were responding to Sandy Galiff's request to consider a traffic light. I recommended to other people in the community not to do that, to ask them to solve the overall problem, which may or may not be a traffic light. You figure out, there's different metrics. So anyway, it's true. I'm right about that though, right?
Yes, you
Dr.
are. That's
Jackson?
why I was confused, because James had asked me to write another letter saying, where are we? And right around the time I was looking to do that, we got that letter that we have. And I do not know if there was any changes up there either, but it is a different response. So certainly I can follow up as well
Thank you so
on
much.
behalf of the board.
Any more questions pertaining to business? We have, so I guess June 18th, we need a meeting, and we just need quorum to accept the vote.
Yes.
And if the vote passes, it's a no-brainer. If the
Yes.
vote doesn't pass, we're going to need to think about how to respond, correct?
And we also need to swear in at least the 2 members whose term would have expired at the vote, so they will need to be sworn in as well. Am I
see.
correct, Dusty? Please help me with this one.
Yes, excuse me. Yes, they would have to be given the oath of office to fulfill the time that's remaining from now until, or actually from the end of the vote next week through the 30th. So they'd be fulfilling that spot.
Okay, so do we need it? Can they be part of the quorum or no? Do we need a quorum plus them? How does that work?
That's good.
If you don't know, you can look into that.
That's a good question. I think I'm going to have to ask. Haven't run into that one before.
So we'll follow up with all of you on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions about businessy stuff? Okay, terrific.
Dusty did post that transportation information, not that you will necessarily approve it, but at least it's there for you to see. It's the easiest place to put it quickly for you.
Hopefully we'll need buses for the fall, right? So consent agenda. I need a motion to accept the consent agenda items B through J.
so moved.
Second? Right, be it resolved, the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District approves the consent agenda items B through J as presented. Any questions before we vote? Any comments before we vote? We vote. I think there's a couple comments here, right?
Sarah has a question.
Yes.
I don't have a question. I did have a couple of comments.
one as part of, let's see, sorry, I'm flipping pages as I printed them out here because I don't have a second computer at the moment. Consent agenda. No, sorry, my comments and questions are for later. Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry.
not a problem. I just want to amend its items B through K. I would draw attention to the fact that we are accepting the resignation of one of our board members, board trustee Jill Lake. Jill is on the board for several years, I think 4 years. She's been a tremendous contributor. She wrote to me and to Dusty that she was going to resign for work and family-related reasons, and we respect that completely. I also wanted to point out that she, in the note, that she supported the board fully and the interim superintendent and the incoming superintendent, and but that she wanted to retire for those or resign for those particular reasons. I just wanted to say thank you to Jill. Always a voice for good, always for a voice for fairness, and I appreciate that, and I will take that and remember that as we move forward, and I think we all should. We'll have to convene at some point in the very near future to consider how to move forward with the vacancy. We have some time to do that, and I think it's with considering all the work we have going on, we will try to make, we are going to have to deliberate, but we don't have any particular pressure to do it at this moment. So I just want to point that out there. I think let us get through the reorg. It might be a charge for the next president. Put it on the list. All right. So we have those. It's all in favor of accepting the consent agenda as indicated, items B through K. Say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand. Thank you. Hands raised. Any nays? Any abstentions? Okay. Please note that vote. Dusty?
Thank you.
Action item 5 are action items. This is going to be one of my sadder moments of the evening, but you know, only because it's we're saying goodbye to someone who's meant so much to so many students and so many members of this community. So I'm going to be reading the retirement acceptance of the letter of intent to retire of Kevin Keegan, middle school science teacher. Whereas Mr. Kevin Keegan, middle school science teacher, has submitted to the Garrison School Board his letter of intent to retire. And whereas Mr. Kevin Keegan has served the Garrison Union Free School District with distinction for 34 years, demonstrating outstanding service to the children, parents, educators, and administrators, and has professionally contributed to our school community each day. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District, with much gratitude, hereby accepts the resignation of Mr. Kevin Keegan, science teacher, for the purpose of retirement, effective the close of business on June 30th, 2020. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I think we need a motion on that, James. We did not get a motion on that.
So
one.
moved. Someone make a so
Second.
moved. Thank you.
Thank you.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Please let it noted that we accepted it unanimously. Anyone have any particular comments from Mr. Keegan?
We all do, I think. Go ahead, Matt.
I just wanted to say, heard about Mr. Keegan when I first started dating my wife 2 decades ago. She had him and loved him, and he made quite an impact. And I know that now as a parent in the district, I've just heard that from successive generations, and I just want to wish him all the very, very best. So thank you so much.
Sarah?
I've never had the chance for my children to have Mr. Keegan, but I have heard about all the wonderful things he has done for our district, how he has embraced the climate change movement into his curriculum, and how he has always put the students first. And he's going to be missed. And I really appreciate all his effort throughout the years. And I hope we find a way to drive by or shout at him and say goodbye at some point and celebrate tremendous career in our school district.
So I wrote to Kevin, and I told him that my 15-year-old ninth grader at Haldane is keen on science, and that's much more because of him than it is because of her father or her mother, and thanked him for it.
This, as you all know, wasn't easy for Kevin at all. He is 34 years. He feels like he's part of Garrison. I wrote him a letter. We spoke a little bit. Interestingly enough, as I went through his file, which is about 3 inches thick, I think I have this right, 7 superintendents he's worked with. So it's just sort of amazing. But in the letter, and I'll share that with the board, and certainly Kevin will have that, I kind of reflect on what David just said. Just paragraph 3, during your career, you've been a presenter, teacher, a scientist, and an environmentalist. You've encouraged your students to do the same. I sincerely believe there are more scientists and environmentalists who had their start in the Garrison School than any school in the state. You had a role in this, as your love of bringing the outdoors to indoor life is contagious. I mean, he clearly is an amazing educator, and it goes on, but he will be missed. He's left his mark, and I know that it's not easy. I can see why you didn't have a motion right off. He'll be missed very much so. So thank you for your kind words. I'm sure he'll listen, and I can add anything else to this letter and make sure he gets it. So thank you.
Court?
Oh, it is with such regret to accept this. Similarly to what David said, he served as such an inspiration to my older daughter. And to know that my younger child is about to enter middle school without Kevin Keegan looming over her in the science classroom is hard to imagine. But his energy, his enthusiasm, his dedication, not to mention the fact as the girls' soccer coach, which was a feat in and of itself, at least in my family. So was really happy to have been able to have a little bit of time with him, and I wish him all the best.
He coached a lot of sports, and it's great. I don't know. What do you say? 34 years of being a successful educator. That's just terrific. It's a roller coaster ride, but the ones that are in it, they don't waver, no matter who's in charge, no matter what the winds are blowing. He delivered what he delivered, and you won't find, I don't think, one graduate from Garrison School that felt like they were not prepared for high school. You will not find one. I've never heard any student say, I wasn't prepared for, science. You won't find one student say that. And I think that was his consistency, his care. And he didn't want to do this, I don't think, but I think he felt like it was time. And that's a hard thing. So he'll be sorely missed. I hope that he will be part of our community forever. And I hope that he can somehow work with him in some advisory capacity. It would be wonderful. And put your minds to work, and we'll try to find a way to honor him in 34 years. I mean, it's a long time.
Deborah, can you say a few words about the process of finding a science teacher by September?
Yeah, and Mike.
It actually said to me, I'm muted as it heard me try to talk. The process, timing is probably well. I'll be frank. We've posted it in OLAS, which is where we post. There are amazing middle school educators out there. Can they fill Kevin's shoes? That's a different conversation. But we'll be looking for someone with an environmental background. Carl and I have been speaking about this. We also you may be aware, with these votes and with budgets, many districts are talking about some of their best and brightest, most recent hires will need to be let go. So there actually should be a bigger pool than you would think. And I'm sorry to hear that, because I know they don't want to lose. But the pool will be there. The economy, the way it is for schools right now, there'll be some shifts. Anyone's loss would be our gain. So again, but there's recent graduates that have come out. I do believe you want someone with a really strong environmental background, and you want someone who can help guide that through the district. There's times when districts look for, more earth science or chemistry, but we really want that life sciences piece. Carl's very aware of that. Again, it's posted, but this timing's not bad. And I really appreciated Kevin when he made this decision to come out and make sure we knew so that we could post. And he's going to help us with, what he sees and what's been done. And he's going to be meeting with Carl about expectations and how the program's been set up, making sure that there's things in his room that he passes on to the next person. So he's not one to let us go. But the timing, I know some of you are concerned. We all would love earlier timing, but this is absolutely doable. And it'll be one of Carl's first priorities to make that hire. I know Spanish has been very hard. This will not be as hard.
Okay. I think we need to move on unless I see other hands. I can't see Jocelyn, but I'm following Jocelyn's.
I'm here.
Yeah, I know. Okay, great. So I need a motion to designate the receiving high schools for 2021.
So moved.
Seconded. Thank you. Be it resolved, the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District, pursuant to the regulations of the Commissioner of Education and the educational law, hereby designates Haldane High School in the Haldane Central School District and James I. O'Neill High School in the Highland Falls, Fort Montgomery Central School District as the receiving high schools for the education of pupils in grades 9 through 12 residing in the Garrison Union Free School District for the 2020-2021 school year. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Or by hand. Thank you. Nays? Abstention? Dusty, record the votes, please.
Thank you.
Item C, approve high school instructional contract for Haldane Central School District 2020-2021. I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded.
Be resolved, the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District hereby approves the contract with Haldane Central School District for instructional services for the education of secondary students for the 2020-2021 school year at the tuition rate of $13,713 for the regular education. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Abstention? Dusty, please record the vote. Item D, approve high school instructional contract with Highland Falls, Fort Montgomery Central School District for 2020-2021. I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Be it resolved, the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District hereby approves the contract with the Highland Falls, Fort Montgomery Central School District for instructional services for the 2020-2021 school year according to the stipulation of settlement dated 8/17/05. The last actual tuition rate of 2018-2019 was $15,575 per student. All in favor say aye. Nays? Abstentions? Dusty, record the vote.
Thank you.
So, these are obviously our high schools, our receiving high schools. Yes, Sarah.
Just to note here, the difference between the Highland Falls is that they're following the NRT formula, and it hasn't been set yet, so it could be a different formula or a different number than the 2018-2019, correct? The calculation will be different.
Yes, it'll be best based on their SA10, their budget numbers. We'll probably get that in December, and that's when you'll get the updated numbers. But it's based on the NRT that's set, so that's why that number is there.
Thank you.
Just indulge a bit of commentary here. Our students are doing very well in these school districts. I think we have did a retreat with Haldane last year on a particular thing. I think we should return the favor or a return opportunity to either do another retreat with Haldane at some point or a workshop or perhaps O'Neill. We used to have liaisons to Haldane and O'Neill, and it might be a good opportunity, especially in these Zoom worlds, maybe to drop in on a meeting or two. So it's something that we let go by the wayside because we had so much to handle this year, and I don't regret that we made that decision. But I do think like it might be next year might be a good time, or this summer might be a good time to try to re-embrace our relationships. Our students are doing very well in these settings, and they should be. We should definitely keep those relationships in a positive and mutually agreeable situation. Okay.
Thank you.
Item 6, first reading of policy 8260. Do we have chairs for committees?
I'm the chair of the policy committee, and I'd be happy to speak to this if you would like.
Yeah, I think it should be practiced that committees have chairs so that we know who's talking or who is the point person for any particular committee. So, Jocelyn, you want to give us a little read on the read? I'm sorry, not Jocelyn.
I was going to say,
Sarah?
I think the chair should do it.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
I would be happy to, and I will ask Deborah at some point to help us as we speak to this. But policy 8260 was pulled out of our big overview of the entire policy binder. This is our Title I Family Engagement Plan. I hope you all had a time to read over it. We spent a lot of time going through this. There's a lot of aspects on this policy where the district is required to list what programs we offer. This is also an opportunity for us to say what we wish to offer. Without going crazy, of course, we are limited by what the current contracts are and whatnot. But if you look through this, one of the things that I think is very important to point out is not only do we list like our Veterans Day program, kindergarten orientation, these programs that we've been doing every year as a district. And it's important to also note that these are the programs the district does. This is not what the PTA does. This is not what GSEF does. This is what we do as programs to reach out and make sure our school community is open and accessible to everyone. Title I families, but everyone. It's really an opportunity for us to make sure we're reaching everybody. And we also have to ask for their feedback. So we have also added in this the equity audit that Dr. Jackson mentioned earlier. We have added childcare during conferences to make sure that parents who work can make sure they get to those conferences. We have added translation services that will be offered, not waiting until a parent asks and says they don't understand. And we have also added feedback from our, curriculum nights, back to school nights, so that parents have an opportunity through the website and through a form that will be provided to say, here's my feedback on what you were doing. They need that opportunity to let us know if we're doing a good job with these programs. And Dr. Jackson, please jump in here, and anything else you wish to share about this, please.
No, I think this has been a required policy, and we couldn't wait because we are having a title audit right now going on, and they want proof that this policy is here and adopted. I think the best part of this policy really was the conversation that's been taking place around it in terms of how do you make sure that all of your parents engage. Kind of like David's opening question, have all the parents been in? That would be the kind of question we need to make sure we address. Every parent has been reached, and we've made every effort to invite every parent into the conversations that we have. And it's really about making sure there aren't any barriers to participate. And sometimes we make barriers that we don't realize are barriers. Like Sarah just mentioned, there isn't childcare. And so in the time that we offer it, parents are working and can't come. So how do we make sure that we are more inclusive? And we have what's called a real open school. So this policy addresses that. You will need to relook at this policy every year and continue to think about this. So while it comes under Title I as a requirement, it's really a wonderful model for all of your parents. It's not just your title parents. And it's how can you engage? And I think the one thing, and I might have said this before, David probably prompted me to say this, when you think about what good came out of the e-learning, I think we learned a lot about what our parents don't know about what we do with teaching and learning. And so we need to do more to help them be able to help their children and not assume that every parent knows what we know. as educators. So this policy is really about that. So I know that Sarah, Jocelyn, and Courtney are excited about adding more pieces in this, but we decided to start really with what we could immediately do and have in place. So we will need to have some meetings during the year as well. So this is about reaching out beyond your PTO, but really reaching out to each and every parent and getting feedback. Sarah?
And we did this in response to the audit, as Dr. Jackson mentioned, but it has gone out to community members who to review. And going forward, we might want to look at expanding that to committee or group of community members who can help us review this policy every year ongoing as a thought. But I'm also want to hear from other board members as to what I'm clearly very excited about this policy. So I hope you are too, and want to hear your thoughts.
I think this was a great example of some of the work that the policy committee has done, and a good mix between what we're legally obligated to have in our policy manual, and that mix with what sitting down to envision what it is we want for our school. I think there's more to do. Obviously, there's always more to do, but I think this is a great example of the work we started nearly a year ago, and will continue to do. And as always, thank you for your enthusiasm about policy, Sarah. It's quite infectious.
Excellent. Jocelyn, did you have a comment?
I was just going to say that I was really happy to be a part of this conversation, and I'm also excited about the additions and changes that we have put in based on learning so much more about how the district is operating, especially as a result of distance learning. So it's great to be part of this, and I hope I only saw one tiny little typo that I'll email you, and then we can. We can hopefully discuss it at the next meeting again.
Yes. And in fairness to all of you, this policy manual is just a series of pages. So pulling a page out, as Dusty will attest, is not easy. So bear with us. And when they all go up to Erie BOCES and they come back, they'll be all formatted, checked. All of that will be looked at even more closely than we did. But right now you had 5 eyes on it.
And just for the sake of the public and for our self-knowledge here, Title I applies to what category of family or student? Economically disadvantaged? What categories?
Even though this is Title I, Parent and Family Engagement, it really, they want it to apply to all of the title grants. So it includes student, and it says right here, for particular attention to parents who are economically disadvantaged, might be disabled, have a limited English proficiency, have limited literacy, or of any racial and ethnic minority background. So it really wants us to, even though they look at those groups, they are saying you need to look beyond the parent who volunteers to be part of the community.
That makes sense.
It's all encompassing.
Yeah, and to underscore Sarah's point, it's an opportunity to say, okay, we're doing it, we have this policy, but the policies, the kinds of things that come up are good for everyone. And I think it helps shape the kinds of experience that families have within the district. And that's really important, as we are going to be discussing very soon, right? Okay, so that was the first reading. And we will have a second reading, correct?
Yes,
and then we'll have an adoption, or right. And where are we with the policy manual, roughly? We're
We are
in
in the last section, the 8,000s. That's pretty exciting. And everyone's been great. Not only this group, but we sent some material out. Melissa's been great, and we send material to her to help us with practice. Paul in our music department gave us some feedback. Just recently, good. Patrick, Michael, I'm leaving people out. Jess helped us with this policy as well. So it's really.
If I remember correctly, the idea is to adopt the whole manual at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, at one time. At which point we're going to need a summary of alterations and things like that, right?
Well,
You
what
have to read-
what?
You have to read the whole thing.
Yeah, we have to read the
You
whole
have to
thing.
actually go through and read the whole thing.
The
But
whole thing.
that's going to be a ways, just to be clear, because
Mhm.
we need to send it back to Erie One BOCES. They have to then check it against law. And there might have been updates in the law since then. This is a very lengthy process, as I'm sure our friends at Haldane can attest to. They've recently
Yeah.
gone through and are still in the process, which is why we're pulling the ones out that need to be pulled out.
Okay.
You
All right.
should also all know that as part of that process, I know Sarah, Courtney, and Jocelyn are aware of this, that the Erie BOCES will arrange for those policies to be posted on our website for parents to look at and community members at any time. So there's complete transparency. They have a way that staff can sign off on the ones that they need to sign off on, and they will give us the updates as they go along. So you won't be in the situation of something changed and you aren't aware of it. So that work, we are signed up to do that. And there's an extra cost if we don't end this on time. So we're motivated by that as well. So we should have a full policy. We should have this done this month, I think.
Terrific. Quickly, discussion items. A, committee updates. We just got the update on policy. Any further updates? I'm guessing not, right? Okay. The planning committee is still where we are since last meeting, so that's not an update. Facilities are still where they are due to, and we're still waiting for the architect and the design team to have their next meeting. So they are right where they need to be. So that's positive. The finance, yes, Jocelyn?
Sorry, I forgot about finance.
That's okay. Finance committee is doesn't have we have a intention to meet depending upon the results of the vote. So, but even if there are no issues or any particular need to meet, we will still meet within the next couple weeks anyway. All right, we're just trying to pick a date depending upon how the vote goes. So, and we'll have a strategy for moving forward with finance. Let's see, and Jocelyn?
I was just going to ask about reentry committee. I feel like I heard there was a meeting perhaps next week or something, and I know David and I have corresponded a little about how that's moving forward along with Sarah. So is there any update on when things are moving forward with that?
I know that Carl has the list of participants. I know he plans on involving everyone at that next meeting. I will ask him to make sure he sends an email out to everyone on that group. I know he sent an email out to the teachers. And you, at this point, Jocelyn and David are on that as well. There's not a lot more information we're going to have coming from the state, so it's really a matter of starting to sit down and make some decisions on what we're going to do. So I'll ask Carl to make sure that that next meeting, I don't know when it's scheduled, to be very honest with you, when the next meeting happens, that everyone on the committee is involved. And they might have been wanting to wait till school ends so those teachers can get through the last days and report cards as well. I honestly it's one of those two things I've been able to hand over and happy to do so. But the board has the full list. I gave that to you. I certainly think if you'd like, I can put that on the public website so people know who to contact. That might be a good thing for me to do as well. So I'll take care of that.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Sarah.
Also, the audit committee met following the last meeting.
How
And
could I forget?
I thought it was very interesting. Thank you to our member of the public who joined us, Mr. Lunenbach.
Lunenbach.
And I believe the audit has underway as of the beginning of June in the building. Is that correct, Deborah?
We have not had anyone in the building as of yet, so no.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, do they have a date set then to come in and begin work, or are they?
I believe right now they're working remotely with Sue in terms of documents, but no, I'm not aware of a date to be in the building, and that I would be because I've insisted that anytime someone's in the building that I or Michael is informed, but both of us are informed, and Michael had been away, so no, they do not right now have a date to be in the building. I can follow up and make sure, I'll make sure the entire board knows when that happens.
I didn't mean to slight the audit committee there, which I'm a member of. So yeah. So and yes, thank you to Jesse for stepping in and playing that role. So our next item up for discussion here is the one of the day. Yes.
Before you go there, I have two things for you. I just want to bring you back. I just want to make sure. Does the board want to make, and I'm not putting you on the spot, a motion on the next meeting so that we can ratify the vote as Thursday? Or
Sure. Need a motion to add an additional meeting to the Garrison Union Free School District School Board calendar for Thursday, June 18th at 7 p.m.
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor say aye. Love a meeting. And we have one.
right, and then before, I'm sorry, and then before you go on to the next topic as well, did you want to hear from Michael about transportation before we move on?
I see a head nod. Courtney thinks so, right? You mean the transportation contract?
Mhm.
Or I would call him the consultant, right? Mr. Tuardi. Let's see where.
I'd have to pull him up to do that.
I always
Okay.
like to hear from Mike Twardy.
He does make you sort of, feel good to see him. Salt of the earth here. Mr. Tuardi, are you there?
Michael?
Michael?
Last
Yeah,
time he told me he fell asleep on us, but
If that camera comes on and he's asleep, we're going to leave that camera on.
How could he
Come on
possibly
now.
sleep through this? I mean,
Scintillating Mr. Gelber, right. Let's go.
honestly, I need to unsend him then because he's not here.
He could have stepped out for a little
Could have
meal.
just walked away. I'll change his back row back to attendee.
Yeah.
But I do know that timing's important on that. So at some point,
Or you got a hand up? You have a suggestion?
Go ahead and finish, Deborah. I just have something separate, but I have a quick question.
no, I just would say that even if you'd like to pass a motion and then give me, all of you read it and get back to me, and if you decide not on Friday, I will not move forward. I don't know. I'm a little concerned about waiting till next Thursday for this one. That's all.
You would like us to act on it now?
Yes. And if you after Mike is back. Okay, Michael is back. Sorry, Michael. Yes.
Where is he? He was out hunting,
He was out biking, for sure.
biking, right.
Can you-
Tuardi, you back?
Are you back? We need to unmute yourself.
Michael?
There we go. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
We
can.
can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh,
You'll
look,
learn.
I'm
There we
laying
go.
on the couch with my pillows.
Is camera on? No? Okay.
I don't know. Video?
All right. You're
No,
okay.
no, that's
All
okay.
right.
As long as we can hear you.
Okay, so did you want to ask me questions? Did you want to ask my opinion or?
Well,
We
yes.
want your sage advice, Mr. Tuardi, about whether whether this particular consultant would serve this district well.
I think he would serve us a lot better than, and I'm not knocking myself here. I think he would know all the right things to put in there. And I'm sure that there would be some things that I would personally forget. Talking to this gentleman today really put me at ease. He brought up a lot of topics that I wasn't even thinking of. As far as he thinks we should go ahead with a bid and not an RFP. An RFP would be too complicated for this. You have to go through 10-step process and weight all these different questions. He thought a bid would be better. It's a little bit cheaper for us with a bid. We talked a lot about the COVID and the distancing on the buses. He just had a lot of good ideas and a lot more input. You know, he's used to doing that, and we're not. And I felt very comfortable talking to him, and I would definitely go ahead with it.
Okay. There we are.
good for me.
Okay. All in favor? Okay, so any motion to accept the, to go into contract with Brian LaFontaine, right? LaFontaine.
So made.
So made. In regards to advising us on our transportation needs and perhaps pursuing an RFP, correct? Am I saying that correct?
Actually, a bid.
A bid.
A bid.
We actually would do the bid. Dusty, I
Okay.
think you put up there a possible, didn't you?
Yes.
Resolution.
All right.
And again,
Terrific.
I just want to be clear. I know this is last minute, so if you think about it on Friday and you say, can you hold off? We want to do more discussion, that's fine. But if you're fine with thinking it's important to start it, so you have buses for September.
It's June 10th right now, so that makes me nervous that we definitely want everything in place by August 15th. So,
And James, there's a resolution on the agenda if you need to see that or read it.
Want me to?
It's under the action items. It'll be.
Why don't you read it for him?
Sure.
Would that be good, James?
I'd have to reload, I think.
Okay.
Do you want me to read it for you?
Yeah, go ahead. Because I'd
Okay.
have to reload my entire page.
Resolved that the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District hereby appoints Transportation Advisory Services as a consultant for the purpose of bid management for student transportation services for the Garrison Union Free School District. And be it further resolved that the board hereby authorizes Dr. Deborah Jackson, interim superintendent, to execute an agreement between Transportation Advisory Services and the Garrison Union Free School District for said services.
Yeah, so moved. Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Abstentions? Any abstentions? Jocelyn? Okay. So please record the abstention. And I think it's wise for us to really sort of, get a better grip on it and greater explanation.
Yeah.
But
Dig into it, ask me some questions. I won't do anything with this, but I just don't necessarily want to wait a week and have everyone look at it. So
right.
I will not act on it till I hear from you all individually.
I think it's important to recognize that public transportation for the purposes of school children is a Byzantine kind of process. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not something easily sketched out.
And you need to maximize your state aid, and that's really part of what this is about as well.
Yeah. Also, you want a fair bid. Okay, terrific. Okay, let's go. Yes, Courtney.
All right, one question. To go back briefly to Jocelyn's question about the I was going to say task force, the committee, the re-entry committee. I know you said you're going to put the information up on the website. If parents who are not involved, who are not on the committee, but that might have feedback or questions about this spring or an opinion, should they contact anybody listed on that committee? Is there somebody specific? Should it be directed to you or Mr. Albano? What's the best way to help somebody out in that way who might have an idea but can't sit on a committee?
Mr. Albano sent me a message and says, I will draft an introductory letter for the entire COVID team outlining the process and send it out by Friday. And with that, I'll make sure that that's in there for them. But I would strongly suggest at this point that if they have ideas, they send them directly to Mr. Albano, and he can have the committee address those as well. When they're going to, it's a large committee, so if you're talking about them going to 15, 20 people, that's really hard to pull together. So at this point, I would suggest his email I'll post his email and have that be the starting point. At some point in the process, if he opts to have someone else be that holder of collecting that information and ideas, we'll change that. But right now, we'll make that on the website.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Hey, thank you all. Is that it? Next item up is the equity discussion item. So how would you like to proceed? I think it's probably safe to say that some of you, that we're all particularly interested in this conversation for a lot of reasons, and that the we passed a resolution last year, correct, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that we voiced ourselves as a welcoming community. But that the events in the last 2 weeks clearly underscore that we need to do more as a community to ensure that diversity is honored, equity is supported, and that anything that undermines inclusion ought to be considered an obstacle, and that we should try to eliminate obstacles that would move us toward a better, more healthy society at large, and a better, more healthy school district, and a better, more healthy community. So with that in mind, I open the floor for discussion in regards to matters of equity as we see them. David?
Well, let's start with the first point about diversity, about welcoming diversity. Now, there are a number of different elements to discuss here, but taking that one on first, I'm gonna have to say I was really impressed by Phil Bonante's letter to his community and to the Haldane community, which forthrightly acknowledged the fact that Cold Spring, Haldane, is a racially homogeneous community. And so the first question I have is whether there's anything we can do to reduce that lack of diversity in the school. I asked Deborah earlier today whether there was any way to welcome minority students from underserved districts, under-resourced districts, and she answered pretty clearly that it's almost impossible to make that work. I mean, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. But whether there are other kind of cooperative programs, anything that, because I think that no matter what else we do, whether it's in terms of curriculum or in terms of staff, if the kids are, if we preserve this kind of white only, more or less dominant white community that we have here without actual exposure to other cultures, you know, I think that it's hard to feel as if we're making any or much progress on this. There's a lot to be said on the curriculum front. And I know Matt's got some really interesting ideas about that. But anyway, I just want to leave it there. How do we make this a more diverse community if we can't bring people from underserved districts into our district?
I just want to remind the members to mute their mics so that we can have a full-on discussion. Yes, Sarah.
I mean, there we go. I was muted. I think I'm going to start with responding to David's question because I think it's interesting, but I think it's also very important for us as a board, to focus on what we can do as the trustees of the district versus what our personal interests outside of this may be. So with that, I mean, what you're talking about is changing how districting works, and how property taxes are linked to districting and how that plays into it. That's a different discussion than what I think we need right now in our district for what we can do as trustees. So when I started thinking about that, I started looking at some of the other examples in what other schools have done in our area. And this has come up in policy committee, as you heard earlier, when we were talking about, you know, the Title I policy and family engagement. So we've been having these conversations before this. And one of the places I looked, I know that Haldane has a committee. There's another school, Hastings has started a committee, a Race Matters. Dr. Jackson mentioned the Courageous Conversations, which is a lovely title, I think, to how we get this together. But for me, I think it's really important that it's not just a board level discussion. And I know committees don't sound exciting, but getting a lot of voices, teachers, we need to know, they'll have ideas on where we go forward with professional development on this, and we need to listen. Parents, community members, people who don't have kids in the school might have ideas and thoughts on this issue. So it would be great to get a committee together that can start having those courageous conversations about this and really move forward from there. I don't think it's something that happens quickly either. There's no swift action here that's suddenly going to bring about great change. We need to take our time and go through it, especially as we address curriculum, all those things. It's not going to happen overnight. So that's where I'm at with this, and look forward to hearing other people's thoughts.
Courtney.
I think, Sarah, what you just said was really important. And what jumped out at me initially when Dr. Jackson made the suggestion of the name of the committee of Courageous Conversations is courageous. And what we're talking about is something that does take courage. The word that keeps jumping out at me personally lately is uncomfortable, about how we all have to get uncomfortable, be uncomfortable having these conversations because they're not easy. A courageous conversation will involve parents admitting, realizing that perhaps we haven't done enough and that there is more we can do. It is teachers recognizing that they haven't done enough and there's more they can do. And it is in no way any criticism about what has been done, what our teachers are doing, what we as parents are doing, but it is about being courageous and looking forward of what we can do, and all of the possibilities out there and what we can shape this school and our community to be.
Jocelyn.
Thanks. I agree that I think we need to form a committee or a task force that involves, excuse me, many different forms of constituents. Courageous Conversations is a trademarked, tool we could use, and there's others that we can explore as well to bring in to help get the dialogue going. But I do want to point out that I don't want it to be bogged down with taking too much time, because what's happening right now is there's action being taken. For example, not related to schools, but on the outside, right? The repeal of 50A, which was the law that allowed police records to be sealed. That just got signed by both sides of our legislature, and Cuomo is going to potentially sign it. So, for example, something happened right away, and there is a momentum now, and there's clearly actions we can take that a committee would be good to work on some of these actions, but there's other actions that I think we can take right now. Not now in this meeting because it's not on the agenda, but actions we can take very swiftly moving forward. And I have a couple of examples that I would, can be discussed, but I know Matt had his hand up earlier.
Either way is fine. If Jocelyn, if you want to give examples that you think would be useful for us to consider in conversation, that's perfectly fine. Matt, do you want to? It's up to you.
Jocelyn, if you want to keep going, that's fine.
I'll just give one other example, which is of swift action, is that there was a local police officer who was appointed at the end of last year in Cold Spring. And as we do as a board, the Board of Trustees of Cold Spring, your greatest fear is of rubber stamping. And, they approved a series of appointments at their reorg meeting. And it came to light that one of the officers that they appointed was involved in the fatal shooting of an unarmed Black teenager in the Bronx several years ago. And so I think that one thing we can do to act right now is to promise to do our homework when we are making appointments and seeing new names come forth. Granted, the record of that officer was, he's not a civilian, he's an officer, and we can only learn so much about appointments that might happen in our district. But I personally feel like I need to do more homework on each appointment that comes, across our agenda, so that we can right away actively be sure that we're not perpetuating cycles of violence or anti-racism that clearly can just kind of get swept under in the goings on of business.
That's an excellent point. I mean, we do, when we sign a contract, we're providing, aid to particular corporations or particular companies or particular businesses or business members, and we should be aware of who we're doing business with. I think that's an excellent point. Matthew.
Thanks. I won't repeat things, but I want to affirm a few things and add something. I agree that listening is very important right now. And I think we need to listen. I don't mean at the expense of urgency. I mean, listen to people, specifically people of color, who are in our community and in our school, without putting them on the spot, but to find a way to make sure that we hear what their experiences are in terms of feeling supported, heard, represented, and incorporate that feedback into urgent action. In terms, and I know that's something that's begun, and we can triple down on that. In terms of the role of curriculum, I agree, and I think in terms of curriculum, a lot of progress has been made on curriculum, and I want to commend everyone for that. And I don't just mean recently, I mean, and not just here, but over the last 30 years, in terms of how social studies and history, for example, are taught and what's taught, which kind of opens up two things. One, it can obviously go farther, and I know our teachers will continue to work on that. But two, it opens up a broader question, which is if curriculum has already changed in so many ways, the New York State curriculum, for example, and things that people have emphasized, and yet people still feel not unheard, underrepresented, left out, disrespected, and like huge swaths of the story aren't being told. And it opens up questions about culture too. And how can we make sure not only that there are curricular changes, but that they're felt and that people feel the experience is real? Just a sort of lived example, my family and I, in a socially distanced way, went on a couple mini field trips the last couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, we went up to Hyde Park, which is open. The house is not open, but the grounds are open dawn till dusk. And you're allowed to walk with masks and gloves in a socially distanced way and see Franklin Roosevelt's surroundings. And it's, for those who've been there, it's an extraordinary place. So the kids loved it. We ran around. It was a great experience. Did a little mini history lesson about the Roosevelts and the role they played. And then this past weekend, we found a couple slave cemeteries very nearby. One is in East Fishkill that are just grown over with poison ivy and one tiny little historical marker. And my 7-year-old and 5-year-old noticed, how well manicured and moneyed and beautifully kept up the Roosevelt estate is, as it should be. It's obviously an enormously important part of our country and its history. And they noticed how utterly forgotten. We didn't need our masks at the slave cemeteries because there weren't any other human beings there. We were all alone for as long as we wanted to be, as we covered it together. So it's obviously that's old history, and I don't mean to distract from what's happening right now in America, but I think it's connected. Finding ways as a community to make sure that not just curricular, but cultural focus is on all these different viewpoints and representations, and they go together. So I have a lot of confidence in people here to do that. But part of that is listening and making sure that, for example, speaking as a white man, I'm hearing what other people's experience is and what they would like us to do to support them. So thanks.
Sarah?
Deborah, can you let Jocelyn back in? She dropped. Okay, got that? Okay. I wanted to just respond quickly with one of the things, I like concrete examples as well. And so when I was looking at the Hastings example, they started not only a committee, but then out of that committee came an idea for a class that is now taught 6th or 8th, where they engage in these conversations. And one of the reasons I say it takes time is that then you're rebuilding your schedule, you're finding source material, you're talking to your teachers have contracts of what they teach. So I don't expect those changes to happen overnight, but I think they're possible. In terms of if we're looking at the concrete, what happens to our students? What type of conversations are they having in the curriculum? And do we have separate time for them to just have these types of these courageous, whatever words you want to use, racism conversations as a course? Setting that up doesn't happen overnight. But I think it's possible.
I had an exchange with two things. One is a question for Deborah. Um, there is this reality that we live in a racially homogeneous community, which, as I said, Benante acknowledged in his letter, and we reflected that as well. And it seems to me that one of the things, if we're talking about curricular stuff, and I propose this to him as well, but that middle school kids ought to have an understanding of why we live in a racially homogeneous community. I mean, there are reasons why that happened. There are reasons in terms of real estate practice. There are reasons in terms of the Ku Klux Klan, I gather, was active in Nelsonville at one point. This should be incorporated as part of the kids understanding what happened in their own community. The question I have for Deborah is this. I don't see how, I mean, and I'm repeating what I said at the beginning, unless we somehow make it easier for our kids to interact with Black and brown children, I don't know how much progress we're really going to make on this. I mean, I think it's fine if people start behaving in a whatever more politically correct way, but I want my kids, and we try and do this in limited ways, actually experience an interaction with kids who are not white and fairly well off. And so my question for Deborah is, given the limitations of districting and tax pay and all the issues that you raised with me, you pointed out, are there ways in which school districts, in which a white upper middle class district mostly can interact more effectively with districts that are predominantly minority districts, and we have them around here. They're not that far away.
Yeah. To answer your question just simply, and I've done this, you partner with another district and you partner for books you read and discussions you have, and then you meet up and you make that effort of seeing things from different lenses. And that's really what you want for your kids. You want them to be able to see someone, which I always call from an otherist point of view. And so it's not just about a field trip. That's not what I'm referring to. And I'm sorry, when I say courageous conversations, I wasn't referring to the trademark. That's been around a long time. I just referred to some of those conversations we need to have. But it's about putting kids together and doing some readings and talking about what they see. And to be frank, that can happen very young. There's no reason that we have to be talking about middle school. I've seen that happen very effectively in first and second grade.
And quickly.
New York State has books that they have a whole thread of, in terms of the required readings of cultural differences. There's books involving Latino children, Afghanistan's children, and things that happen, fiction, nonfiction, that run a thread all the way through the curriculum. But having those conversations about those books with other children and teachers who think differently or have different insights than we might is a possibility. I am not suggesting that that's what you do, David. I think I'm getting back to what everyone else is saying, that that's part of the conversation, but it's certainly something that we can do. We do, I don't know if this district does, but when you do retreats at FDR, you have some of those conversations because you're in that surrounding as well. So it's really bringing that awareness, and we have a responsibility because we are not diverse, in my personal opinion.
So just to follow up on that, so what would that mean? Would Carl or the principal contact a counterpart in Newburgh or Beacon or Peekskill and make that sort of thing happen? Is that how it would?
I mean, that's certainly one way it can happen. There's lots of ways it can happen, but yes, I think that there's ways you can engage children together in a larger group. And I think you try to do that now. You do that with the climate work. You don't necessarily just have those conversations around students who are in Garrison. You open that up and you help students talk to other students in other places that are doing that work. So again, I'm not the expert in this, David, so but all of that's possible. I think it's a matter of focusing what are some of those first steps and put a plan together in terms of what are those priorities. Because otherwise, you're going to be doing a little bit of what Matthew said, just sort of going out in all these different directions, and then you burn yourself out, and you're doing activities. You aren't really making structural change. And so that's why I would encourage you to really plan out what your priorities are, and not just simply build some more activities in. And I will argue activities without cultural awareness is basically sometimes perpetuating some of the same biases that we already have. And to be frank, well, I'm sorry, Matthew, go ahead.
I was actually going to make that point, that exact point. I also want to make sure that we do this, but also remain conscious of those in our community who are people of color, and at our school, students of color, to make sure that they feel fully 100% part of the school community and 100% support in the community.
Sarah.
I really think it comes down to the planning and making sure it's not us, well, you know, that sounds like a quick, oh, great, we've got this great idea, we could do this. We want to make sure we have input and really thought it through from our parents in the community and our teachers. You know, there might be professional development that they need in order to get to these goals. And we might want to hear from them what that is, because they're going to be the ones in the classroom teaching these lessons. So I really would want to have that voice as part of this conversation going forward.
Jocelyn.
I agree. I definitely feel like we need, PD is one avenue to go. And I think teachers might have ideas of what they would need, but also I'm sure that Mr. Albano, who's coming on board, will have ideas. I know Deborah probably has ideas that she can share. And others are educators or just adults in this world who might have other ideas. I know many things have been brought to the district on ideas for what we might be able to provide, not only as PD, but also maybe as a community conversation. So I think that's another action we could take very soon. It would be horrible to imagine that it might be over Zoom, but can we hold community-wide conversations that are not necessarily like a committee that we might form that's going to be ongoing, which would require commitment from people, but rather just get people able to come together soon to discuss this as a school district. And I had one other thing before, and so I'll come back once it comes to me.
Well, I mean, you know, for me, it's the question of, you know, the role of education, right? So when education becomes an extension of the disparities that the society perpetuates, it becomes self-defeating. Horace Mann refers to education as the great, you know, equalizer, the leveler. When I was a kid, we were taught that school mattered because you could transform your life with school. You could go off, you can go to college, you could become what I was raised by a single mom and for 4 kids, and we were on welfare for a while, and we worked really, you know, my mom worked really, really hard so that we'd have the opportunity to go to a so-so college, right? And it was our idea that if we did that and we worked hard, we could transform our lives and move our social classes and, you know, buy a cute little house in Garrison, right? And that happened for me, right? And I don't think that happens for everybody. And I think that doesn't happen for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, and a lot of them are historical. But education needs to run against society at certain moments. That is to say, we have to be uncomfortable. We have to be able to question, why is it we live here, right? What is our perceptions of safety? What are perceptions of what a healthy environment looks like? And what does it mean to be white? Do we even talk about our whiteness, our race in that way? And what does that mean? How come we're white? How come we identify as white? Where does that come from? So, you know, we can talk about equity, but really we're talking about racism. And right now, the people of color do not perceive from their government and from their society either liberty or justice, which we teach our kids to pledge allegiance to, or at least encourage and give the opportunity of kids to pledge allegiance to every single day. So if those words aren't going to be empty, it's going to require us to go about in some methodical way to question and to analyze and to encourage how we provide the most amount of liberty and the most amount of justice to the most amount of people. Because right now they feel disenfranchised, obviously. It's an expression of disenfranchisement. It's an expression of a lack of safety, right? So we have to, what we have to do is, as I see it, is we're obligated to provide a healthy, safe place for children to come to learn so that we can advance our society forward. If we could rely on the cultural differences of our community to offset a kind of cultural homogenous education, we could do that. But we don't have that, as David has, eloquently put. We have a homogeneous society. So how do we diversify that? The school has to play a role in that, because that is our mandate, is to equalize the inequities. And if we don't do that, nobody's going to do that. It's fruitless, right? If the school doesn't see that as part of their mission, those inequities will continue to perpetuate. And whether that is economic inequity, racial inequity, whatever the disparities be, and how they play out along race, sex, gender, sexuality, all the different ways that we can put people in awkward places, to other them. And what does that mean, to create otherness? Why do we do it? How do we do it? And that becomes a very self-reflective, interpersonal thing, but it's also a question of how do we institutionally are asking our children and our parents to question that, to analyze that, to question that, and to provide counter narratives to everything's okay. And that part of that is understanding the legacy of our own local racism. That is the racism that happens within the building and the racism that happens across the community. And where does that come from?
I think you really stated that really well, the idea of education, the function of education as serving a kind of a counter narrative. I think what's happened in the last couple of weeks in this country, the one thing I would dispute about what you said is that it's not just people of color who are understanding the systemic nature of racism in this country right now. This is it seems to me to be a transition moment when those demonstrations out there are predominantly white, from what
Let me clarify. It is the people of color who are subjugated and brutalized because of these inequities. And it is the obligation of a society, white, brown, black, to intervene on those folks' behalf, or else we're not living a just society. That is happening, and it's time that we do what we need to do on our local level as trustees in order to ensure that our community is not falling short in this particular mission. That's all I'm saying.
The thing is that what's happened in the last couple of weeks, it seems to me, is that things that were taken for granted about police behavior, about the way in which this problem of racism is baked in ways that well-meaning people don't quite comprehend. For instance, zoning, right? I mean, that's just why we've seen it with police practices. The people are questioning and wondering whether, do we need to have the kind of police that we have now? Do they all need to have guns? Is that really necessary? Since about only 5% of their encounters with public are violent ones. Rethinking the way that, how does zoning, which is something that we know up here, how does that contribute to racism? And so, but I think the point here is that people of good heart, people with good hearts, don't fully understand the extent to which this problem, which has existed in this country for 400 years now, is baked into the system. And it brings me back to something that Deborah said at the very beginning, which was that she thought that it was important for some kind of professional development process, that maybe the way to begin this and to actually do something is to figure out ways for teachers with some outside professional advice or not, can actually reflect more deeply than they have to this point on how they're taken for granted might be might be a problem in terms of their professional performance. So I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see something happen along those lines.
I also think sister cities is actually a really good thing too, and think globally as well. If you can globalize your experience a little bit, you can also look at your own community through those intercultural lenses. So yeah, I mean, there's sister cities that are within the United States, or sister communities, and there are also sister cities all over the world. You can have sister schools. You can develop a relationship. There's a whole program that does this for you. You buy into it or whatever. They set up relationships, and you can have those conversations where you share books, share letters, develop relationships across borders. And with Zoom and the tech, it's easier in some ways. So it's just something that's like one idea. But that's like an idea that, time has come. Jocelyn?
I think that you're both hitting on something that's important, which I was listening recently to an On Being episode, and one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, Patrisse Cullors, was commenting on, she said this: you can't policy your racism away. So this has to come from deep within each individual person, because it's a cultural shift. And no matter what, even as a board, we may say, write this into the wellness committee, write this into code of conduct. It's the practice that really will shape it. And so I think there's a lot of multi-directional work that has to happen. And so I appreciate the idea of really asking and giving time to our staff and faculty to reflect on it. And also encouraging all the white people to understand how we and our bodies are benefiting because of the culture we live in. And, I didn't know that right away. I mean, it took me a long time to learn it, and I'm still learning it, right? I also don't know it all yet. And so, I mean, of course, but I think there's so much growth to happen that I think as much as we can get it into people's minds and onto their curricula and their professional development plans and into their just daily conversations. And related to this, the Black Lives Matter global, what the heck is it called? It's a global movement. The Global Network of Educators had 3 demands. I think as a district, we could consider honoring them, and we might already honor them, but they set forth 3 demands. First is to end zero tolerance discipline and implement restorative justice in schools. The second demand is to hire more Black teachers. The third demand is to mandate Black history and ethnic studies in K through 12. So we have little bits of all of that, but I think keeping those things in mind and actually putting into practice all of them, of course, in consultation with whatever task force or committee full of different types of constituents comes forth, I think would be another way for us to act very soon.
The frustrations of living, I mean, part of the deal is, a lot of what we're seeing is in our education world is an expression of property taxes driving districts. When property taxes fund districts, it creates all kinds of divisions and problems. And
David brought up zoning before.
Zoning, redlining.
If we really got to that, that's deep, and I don't know that a board of education can dismantle that.
No, we can't. But we can
making sure
teach
folks
people
understand
about
it. Right.
I'm hearing you. You're dropping it. I'm picking it up. Yes, Sarah.
No, we can't change our zoning, but that distracted me for a moment. Oh, the code of conduct. I think that is a place where this conversation needs to happen and then keep happening. It's really important that as a district, this is something we can control, and also look at how that's set up for us. To have that conversation, we have to bring in parents. We have to bring in teachers. We can't, as a board, set the code of conduct without bringing in those people so that it becomes effective. And then it reflects the community, and we've all thought about it. So I think that's one of the really important ones we have to look at going forward, and what our practices are, and then hold ourselves accountable. that's why you're supposed to look at those, why we're supposed to look at those policies every year, is to say, you know, did we do it? It's why when we are talking about the family engagement, when we put in feedback, so we can get feedback from parents and say, you know, when you went to that literacy workshop, how did you feel? Did it speak to you? Did you feel marginalized? Did you feel like it was only speaking to, you know, the parents who are there, able to be there every day volunteering or something? Like, ask those questions, take that feedback, and then do better.
It's important to learn. And I think I think what we should do is sort of I think we should form a task force, and I think we should look for places that are already there, whether it be code of conduct or areas of our concern in which we can have more immediate impact. And I think we should look at outreach and community engagement, outreach outside of our community, for educational tools, for community building tools, for cross-community conversational tools, something this is what David's is pointing at. And then we need to look for community engagement methodologies within those three realms, which are, one, sort of the programming that we do in the school, programming toward the community, and programming cross communities. If the task force is given a broad enough charge in that way, we can hopefully provide immediate kinds of programs and actions that will have, you know, keep a conversation going. I think, you know, it shouldn't take how many brutal murders before, you know, white people look inward. It shouldn't take it. You know, it shouldn't have to be this many dead people, but it has been going on, as David said, for 400 years with African Americans and 500 years with Native Americans. So, you know, our tolerance for intolerance seems to be insufferable, right? We can tolerate intolerance for a long time in this country, and the question is what can we do to demonstrate to our people, the people we are engaged in the school that we're trusted to hold in the education and the fiscal shape it's in, what can we provide as a board or as a district to facilitate that conversation about, and I think that's the question, right?
So
what are you thinking, David?
Based on the letters that Deborah was reading before, there's apparently well, at least one parent in the Garrison community who's unaware that any Black men and women have been murdered by police other than Mr. Floyd. I find that kind of stunning. And I guess what I would ask this question: suppose the school were in session and we were not in the midst of a pandemic. Kids were going to school every day. There seems to be basic factual information that people don't apprehend, haven't gotten about this. So what would we have done? What would our social studies teacher or teachers have done assuming the school was in progress right now, was happening? What could they have done to educate students here and the community about the fact that it wasn't just one cop putting his knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds? I mean, how, one of the things that, I do a lot of work in the climate front, and I recognize that there are millions and millions and millions of Americans who don't understand the first thing about it, about the issue of climate. Not the first thing. Only 20% of Americans know that 97% of climate scientists are absolutely clear on the science of it. That's like a gateway belief. If you don't get that the science is settled on this, then you don't know a whole lot, right? And so here we have a case that Deborah points to, or a letter that she received, of a parent who thinks that what other murders have there been besides George Floyd? That's a remarkable question in June of 2020. It kind of stuns me. And so I'm asking the question, and I'd like to know what Matt thinks about this, because he's a teacher and a very good one. If you, in your school, what would you have done if you were teaching here, if you were teaching middle school history, How would you have dealt with this situation with your kids?
Well, I'll pivot slightly, but I think a lot of what our teachers probably are doing, which is doing exactly what you're doing right now, just talking about it in no uncertain terms, and covering the history of the United States. I did want to bring up. I was talking to a friend of mine who also made the point that, and I want to make this point as he did, without minimizing what you're all talking about in terms of the lethal part of America, that for many people in our community, my friend happens to be African American. He was saying for many people in our community, as important as the George Floyd story is, he thinks the Central Park video from a couple of days prior might be even more important. Not obviously on a moral level to dismiss or minimize in any way the deaths that you're talking about, but that there are many people who are very comfortable, more than comfortable, enthusiastic in opposing murder, which is what we saw happen to George Floyd, as we should be, and we should be active on that, but are maybe a little less self-aware and inward looking when it comes to the sort of bigotry that was obvious in that video as well, which can lead to murder. But often just leads to the othering that James, you were talking about. And so I think that is also something for us to engage in as we look in the mirror, which is, if you identify as a person who is part of this cause, part of this movement, and you believe in educating people, there's that cultural piece, which is not just educating them on the lethal strand of our country's history, which I agree, David, needs to be at the forefront of the curriculum, but also this cultural element that allows people to not see others as themselves, that allows them to devalue entire parts of their history, like the slave cemeteries I was talking about, and that allows them to think of themselves as one of the good guys because they haven't killed. But just because you haven't killed doesn't mean you're not on that side. And I think we have a lot of soul searching to do on that front as well.
I guess there's a question of
Your African American friend was totally right about the Central Park thing, because that woman in Central Park, a white collar woman who had a job in an investment firm, saw a black bird watcher who was complaining about her dog, and she called the police and she weaponized race. That's what she did. There is a black man who is, and I'm in danger in Central Park from a bird watcher. So you're right. You're absolutely right. It's not just about murder, although there have been far too many of those.
Well, racism is insidious. As my former neighbor Toni Morrison would say, racism is to live across from Toni Morrison was like living across from God. It was an amazing human being. And, one of the things she said was racism is what created race. Racism is what creates race. Races don't exist. You create race out of racism. First, you have to have racism, and then you have races. And the point here is that, that's what's happening with that story in Central Park with the African-American birder and somebody who didn't want to put their dog on the leash. And he just said, you got to put your dog on the leash because it scares off all the birds. It's also illegal, So he was just doing his civic duty, and she pulled, she called the cops, and she racialized this situation, and we have to be careful. My point here is that we have to be careful how we do that and how people do that all the time, about who their neighbors are. And I think we can go on and on about this, but I think it's very important for us to start moving toward ascribing positions, ascribing particular programs, and building partnerships with teachers and building partnerships with community members in order to forward the conversation. If it's going to go anywhere, it's going to be a conversation. It's also going to be experiential. And how do we do that? Jocelyn?
I'm just curious, because I don't know the answer. How quickly can we revisit the curriculum and adjust some things so that this issue gets addressed on the first day of e-learning in September? for all of our grades. I don't really know, but I think that that's kind of not a demand, but an ask of many of our parents, whether they are people of color or white families, wanting to know when can we start making some shifts. And I think another question I have is when can we hold a community training or forum so that we can speak to, for example, that the individual David was bringing up, and start really, cultivating this discussion, the conversation, the courageous conversation that you're all talking about.
I guess that's a question. I think we need to, I hate to say this, but I think that we have to take the lead as superintendent, a few board members who want to be part of a task force, form the task force, come up with an action plan and start moving on things as soon as possible. I really think that we can do some things. I mean, whether it's partnering with GSEF, with coming up with maybe some grants for particular things. Parents can always write grants, board members can write grants. And one of the things I floated, and maybe this is way too much money, is like, I would love to see, some of our students take that trip down to the Legacy Museum in Alabama, or to the African American History Museum in Washington. I mean, some of the information that they'll be exposed to is pretty rich, and it can tie nicely into whatever books are going on. So those type of initiatives, they might be one-offs, right? But they also might be, if they're amended with something that's more constant, we could lead to something more powerful. Deborah.
I'm just going to quickly say this. It's just a very simple thing. We're putting together our summer reading. Let's put some books in there that address this issue for every grade level and ask parents and students to start that reading. I mean, I know it's not what you're talking about, Jocelyn, but it's immediate and it can happen right now.
Sarah, we're going to have to close this a bit. Yes, Sarah. We have a very long executive session. I want to remind everybody, but, and we need our brains for it. As well. Yes.
Yeah. To bring it to a close with, the idea of taking the task force, one of the ideas we talked about in policy committee was having an application process for that, and having people write an essay about why they want to be on the task force and where they are, like, what are their thoughts about this issue? What do they want to see change? And then gathering that together. I think that will help us in forming a very effective task force. And then also to the literature, I think one of the other things we can look at, summer reading is definitely it, but there's always the opportunity to do, I know this from when I worked in publishing, that the one book, one read, where everybody, whether you listen to the audio, whether you're able to read it, as a school, we read one book together. And summer is a wonderful opportunity to pick one book. I would say the choice of that should go through the administration and from our teachers, as they are the ones who are going to have to implement and lead the discussion. But it's a great opportunity to then have that discussion based on the text. I'll be quiet now.
Never be quiet. Silence is complicity. Okay. It is. Okay. So, we've come to an end, I believe. There's some comments on the thread here that from the public comment period, which follows this one, I believe, in the agenda. Is that correct, Dusty? Public comment? Right. So there's a comment here from someone named, I want to say Lauren Benarius. I don't know how to say the name. I'm very sorry. I think a very immediate and beneficial thing that could happen in school could come through the books that classes read together that center around race, history, and slavery. Things like books like Freedom Train, about Harriet Tubman, To Kill a Mockingbird, which was a staple, and important books by and about people of color. It was already addressed, but thanks. All right, Lauren, we hear you loud and clear. Anyone else have any comment from the public? Very powerful and emotional topic, I'm sure. Just want to give some space in case people want to say something. I don't think I skipped anybody. All right. Okay. I think that we've said a lot, and I hope that, what we're trying to do is find someone's volunteering to be on the committee. Emily Quant, I think the name is, Quant.
James, can we set up a procedure to create that task force?
Yeah, simple. It's either, is it going to be a Deborah or Dr. Jackson thing, or is it going to be a Mr. Albano thing? Or it's going to be a Sarah Tormey thing?
I think
A
Deborah
Johnson
has
thing?
to, it has to happen tomorrow. So Deborah, since she's still with us, I hope gets it going.
Okay,
I
so
certainly
You
want
don't
to be
mind,
part of
Dr.
it.
Jackson.
I certainly will want to be part of this, and I certainly will partner with Carl on it, so we'll work on it together, because much like some other things, you want to make sure there's smooth transition going forward. Sarah had talked about, and I certainly will start working with teachers on a book read and possibly books on the list. That's like a very easy first start, but that doesn't take us to where we need to go. I just want to be very honest about that. And Sarah, you talked about possibly putting together some questions for
yep, you're off. There you go, Deborah.
for why they might want to be. And I would encourage that, because one thing you don't want to do either is, we're talking about systemic racism. I mean, that's really what we're talking about. And you really want us all to look inward and have that sense of what are we going to do, and not simply ask people of color, what do you think we should do? I think it's a very self-reflective process, and we want people who want to reflect with us, because there aren't easy answers. So I do think the idea of people letting us know why they want to be on that. And I don't know that there's any limit, but that was Sarah's suggestion.
Well, you know, I think, and I think more immediately, you have the code of conduct on the rise as well, and you have questions about discipline and restorative justice. I mean, you know, this sort of practice of where you're not just punishing kids for misbehavior, that you're teaching them how to participate in the healing process of
James, one of the
violence.
key things
It's huge. It's
yeah.
huge.
One of the key things we have to do with all that's going on with COVID and coming back is first thing on the page. I don't care what anyone says. It's tied to this as well, social and emotional health. And that's all part of this as well. How do we work with others in ways that are positive, in terms of restorative justice, in terms of how we treat others, how we treat ourselves. So I think there's a lot here to do. But whatever direction you would like, I will work with Carl on. He's been amazing.
So I think if you're interested, if the public's interested, if people are interested, they should send an email, a query to Dr. Jackson. It's djackson@gufs.org. That's the start. Carl can do it together. You can share that, and we can blend over nicely, and then we'll figure out a structure for that.
Good.
I mean, this sooner the better, I think, is the way to go.
I'll put something on the website as well, saying if people are interested, to make sure they reach out to me, so they don't hear from this meeting.
Okay, so without objection, is there any board member comment, or should we move to executive session?
I just want to say thank you to Jill for her service.
Oh.
I know you brought it up earlier, but I had it down for a board comment.
Oh, thank you so much, Jocelyn. I think what do I hear something? What, Sarah, what could it be? Sarah.
Steve, this is Dr. Jackson's last public meeting, although actually now we just added one, so maybe I should save the wine for Dr. Jackson.
No, I think we should celebrate now.
Well,
I'm not on school grounds.
No one is, and I have a case of what I hope is some of your favorite red wines to be delivered to you. I could bring them to school grounds and bring them to you. We will figure this out.
But put it in my car, and they don't have to hit the school building.
Great.
It's a red Subaru Legacy. I'll just leave the trunk open. You just drop it in there. No questions asked.
Deborah, apparently Sarah and the rest of the board members are not aware that you're a teetotaler.
Oh, yes. My husband had my wishes I was a teetotaler when it comes to wine.
So with the curatorial power of Liza down at Flower Cup, you'll be drinking some fairly tasty natural wines. So Yeah, you'll,
Love to be educated.
every bottle of natural wine is an adventure in and of itself. Okay.
Honestly, it's not the last meeting, but I will thank you all separately. This is a wonderful place.
It's the first public meeting, or last public meeting, I think. So,
Until next week.
Until
Now.
we do the vote next week. Yes.
Yeah.
Please. Thank you.
yeah. So there's more thank yous, but we wanted to thank you now and forevermore.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, we have more to do, more celebration to do. Okay, and plans are being hatched. Excellent. Okay, need a motion to move to executive session. Okay. Be it resolved, the Board of Education of the Garrison Union Free School District enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing the employment history of particular employees. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nays, abstentions, and the ayes have it. And we are now in executive session. I'd like a motion to take a